Okay, well, welcome everybody. Hello. My name is Melissa Gallant. I'm a senior advisor on climate at the Nature Conservancy. And welcome to this, the final session of this year's NACW. So glad you're able to join us. Before I get started, I just want to say thank you very much to the Climate Action Reserve for hosting us today. Thank you so much for our panelists here. We've got Steph from Microsoft. And joining remotely, we've got Henrique from the Voluntary Carbon, excuse me, from Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative. Thank you to both of you for joining us. And before I introduce you more completely, I'm going to start by just kind of setting the stage a little bit for our topic today, which is the role of the voluntary carbon markets in meeting net zero targets. How companies should be investing in net zero. So this is part two of a two-part series. We just had the first one a little bit earlier. The first one was focused on supply, and today we're going to be talking in this session kind of about the demand side and from the buyer's perspective. So I don't know if you all have been in the same sessions that I have this week, but this has certainly been a hot topic. Both from the perspective of the standards and guidance that are in the space, and then also kind of more broadly on the role of the private sector in the voluntary carbon market. And so I think that reflects, how much of an important topic it is, especially right now, not just at NACW, but also kind of across the climate space more broadly. So what's going on? Let me just start with a couple numbers. We now have over 8,000 companies that have set net zero targets or committed to set targets with SBTi. 5,000 of those have been approved by SBTi. The 2023 net zero tracker found that almost half of the world's 2,000 largest companies have set some kind of a net zero target. But how many companies are on track to meet those targets is a bit of a different story. So importantly, we don't yet have a standardized way to assess whether or not companies are on track to meet their targets, but according to self-reported data from CDP, fewer than 40% of S&P 500 companies with targets are on track to meet those targets. And then according to a report from Ecosystem Marketplace last year, only about 13% of companies reporting to CDP reported buying credits. But the companies that are buying credits were also more likely to have ambitious climate targets. So the report found that 78% of voluntary carbon market buyers had an absolute reduction target, compared with just 42% of non-buyers. But it's not an easy space for companies to navigate, especially right now. Just yesterday, We Mean Business put out a new report based on interviews with 27 companies. They found that the number one challenge that companies are facing when engaging in the voluntary carbon market is a lack of recognition of credits by climate goal standards. The second biggest challenge was unclear rules on making claims and associated risks. And the third was a lack of transparency on quality. So as far as standards go, I know we've got a sophisticated audience here, but just very briefly, at the heart of the discussion on defining the role of carbon markets in net zero is really the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, VCMI, which defines a good use of carbon credits. And then we have the Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTi, which sets out guidance on how companies should set net zero targets. I won't get into the weeds on VCMI because we have our very own representative here today. But just at a very high level, VCMI published the claims code last year, which allows companies to make claims based on their credit purchases. Those claims are for the use of credits going beyond their internal targets and emission reductions. Just before COP last year, they also released a beta version of the Scope 3 flexibility claim that would allow companies to use credits towards meeting a portion of their Scope 3 targets. SBTi, on the other hand, in the corporate net zero standard, they translate a science-based trajectory to meeting our global climate goals to a company level. They do not allow companies to use credits towards meeting their targets, with the exception of addressing residual emissions after the company has met its climate targets. In the meantime, SBTi says that credits should be used only for beyond value chain mitigation or going above and beyond their climate targets. So the guidance does explicitly align with VCMI's claim code, but not necessarily the Scope 3 flexibility claim. There are other frameworks that are out there that speak to this, but not to the same level of detail or standardization as VCMI or SBTi. There's the Oxford Principles on Net Zero Aligned Carbon Offsetting, which says to prioritize reducing emissions internally and minimize the need for offsets to achieve net zero. They also say over time to shift towards removals-based offsetting. A report from a high-level expert group convened by the UNFCCC released at COP27 said that companies should be prioritizing reducing emissions within their value chains and use credits towards beyond value chain mitigation, but not towards meeting their goals. So at the core, I think, is a tension between two different concerns. On the one hand, by allowing the greater use of credits, there's a concern that companies will not focus enough on reducing their own internal emissions and instead rely on purchasing external credits, which will not be enough to meet global climate goals. On the other hand, by overly restricting the use of credits, there's a concern that companies will be forced to focus only on internal emission reductions, which can be very complex and costly, especially in the near term, and ultimately risks companies not being able to meet their targets or even pulling back from climate commitments altogether. So, on that note, I will turn to our esteemed panelists here, who I'm sure will be able to sort all this out in the next 50 minutes. No, but in all seriousness, I'm so grateful to have both of you here today. It's great to have representatives both from standard-setting organizations and from a company navigating the space. So without further ado, on my left here is Steph Harris, Senior Program Manager on Carbon Removals at Microsoft. Steph is a buyer on Microsoft's carbon dioxide removal team, or CDR team, focused on Microsoft's CDR portfolio, upstream origination, and expanding the company's pipeline of new projects. Before joining Microsoft last year, Steph spent 8 years at 3 Degrees, where she was the director of the carbon markets team, managing its voluntary carbon credit portfolio. And she has a master's degree in environmental science and management from the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara. Welcome, Steph.
Thank you for having me.
And then on the screen today, we have Henrique Luge, who is graciously joining us from Brazil. Henrique is the manager of markets and standards at the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, VCMI, where he's focused on developing the Scope 3 flexibility claim. He has a background in energy planning, on the valuation of environmental impacts, and has dedicated his career to studying and implementing sustainable practices in different economic sectors in Brazil. Henrique also holds a degree in biology, a PhD in environmental planning from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and he's earning his master's in energy planning. Welcome. So I have several questions for you both, and then I'd love to turn it over to our audience here, who I'm sure have many questions as well. So first of all, for you, Henrique, VCMI is central to defining the role of the voluntary carbon market in meeting net zero targets. Can you talk about what you're working on and about VCMI's philosophy behind your claims and guidance? In particular, I know that you are very focused on the Scope 3 flexibility claim, and would love for you to share some of your insight for how you're thinking about that, and what the outlook is looking like for finalizing that claim.
Thank you, Melissa. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. And also, it's a great pleasure to divide this panel with you, also, Steph. And I'll gladly respond to that. As VCMI, as our name implies, works ensuring integrity in voluntary carbon market. As you were in your introduction, and thank you for that, you brought this. And what we want, integrity builds trust and confidence, and trust and confidence builds scale. That's what we need. Also, you brought that one hand, we have ICVCM core carbon principles ensuring integrity on the supply side. This means that the carbon credits represent real, verified GHG reductions and removals and apply robust environmental and social safeguards. On the other hand, VCMI's claims code of practice ensures integrity on the demand side. This means that companies can use carbon credits in addition to, not instead of, decarbonization and make credible claims. And how we do it. VCMI, as you spoke, has delivered a claims code of practice to incentivize climate leadership and is a go-to guidance for companies on credible claims, which incorporates other standards, including one you mentioned, GHG Protocol, SBTi, CDP, and ICVCM. Companies can now make a carbon intensity claim and get recognized for accelerating global net zero. Also, since last November, the claims can be verified using the VCMI monthly reporting and assurance framework, giving more credibility to the claims. And what do a company needs to make a carbon intensity claim? Telling about what we do. Companies need to maintain and publicly disclose an annual greenhouse gas emissions inventory. They need to set and publicly disclose science-aligned near-term emission reduction targets for scope 1, 2, and 3. Third, they have to demonstrate that the company is making progress towards meeting their near-term emission reduction target. And fourth and last, they need to demonstrate that the company public policy advocacy supports the goals of the Paris Agreement and does not represent a barrier to ambitious climate regulations. Those are the conditions, the foundation criteria that makes a company eligible to make a carbon intensity claim. That means that the company, as you also said, is going above and beyond science-aligned emissions cuts by using high-quality carbon credits. Today, we have 3 levels of this type of claims. We have the silver, gold, and platinum that recognize increasing levels of climate achievement. And what is the goal? We want VCMI that should be recognized as a valid solution to the climate crisis. And we can't afford to have VCMs without integrity. And what VCMI and ICVCM is giving to the market is an end-to-end rules for integrity to address the faults that we have in the past, and we have that. Now about Scope 3 flexibility claim that you asked me, that I'm focused since I joined VCMI. We launched on last November the beta version of the Scope 3 flexibility claim to recognize companies getting back on the path to net zero. So it's not the above and beyond that we're talking about on carbon integrity as you brought. But not all companies, even among climate leaders, can meet near-term targets for Scope 3. Sometimes they face structural challenges which they have very low influence on. That's the problem that we are dealing with. We are dealing with structural challenges, not lack of interest on investing on Scope 3 emission reduction. So VCMI's beta version of the Scope 3 flexibility claim will enable these companies to act and be recognized by climate leadership while at the same time increasing internal decarbonization on their value chain. As you also brought, we have this huge opportunity that a recent study from Trove shows that $15 billion could be delivered in additional finance if more companies with SBTi targets used carbon credits to take responsibility for their Scope 3 emissions gap. This claim, when final, will allow companies to use the carbon credits to bridge this gap between their current emissions and their target Scope 3 emissions for the same year, where they should supposed to be. Carbon credits that can be used for this claim is limited and also must decline to zero until 2035 or within 10 years, whichever comes first. So that's a claim for companies to be back on track, not to lift any responsibility that they have on meeting their targets. Also, I will talk more about Scope 3 later, I hope. For the Scope 3 flexibility claim, a roadmap will finalize the claim by the third quarter of 2024. And also VCMI, for this sensible claim, has consulted with over 150 corporate sustainability, finance, and climate experts to inform its work in 2023. So we are trying to build it together, and this close collaboration will continue, and we hope to be together on this. Hope I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. So Steph, over to you. Microsoft has been a buyer in the VCM for many years now. Carbon credits are a core part of meeting your climate goals, which include being carbon negative by 2030. Can you talk about how Microsoft sees the role of credits in your climate targets? And then on the flip side, how do you also see the role that Microsoft plays in the voluntary carbon markets?
Absolutely. So Microsoft set a carbon neutrality target in 2012, and then in 2020 ramped that up to be carbon negative by 2030. That also includes reductions across scopes 1 and 2 to nearly zero by 2030, and halving scope 3 emissions also by 2030, which means there will still be residual unabated emissions within our value chain that we won't be able to address by 2030. So the role of carbon credits within our carbon negativity target is specifically focused on carbon removal in order to remove as much carbon from the atmosphere as we are emitting, have emitted. We also have a historic target to remove all historic emissions back through 1975. So we have our work cut out for us in terms of how we're engaging within the carbon market to support these large and long-term goals that we have set as an organization. We've specifically focused on carbon removals and the carbon negativity target because we see a need to help build capacity within this space. In terms of thinking about how we're going to achieve a global net zero space, it's going to require a basket of all solutions. And I think the carbon removal market is still in early stages, very nascent, and Microsoft sees this unique role that we can play in helping to send demand signals to both the supply side of the market, to investors who, maybe more traditional investors who might not have the confidence in making some of these big bets that it's unclear how that's going to pay off. And so we think that we can play this catalytic role in helping to show project developers and financiers that there is demand for removals and for high quality removals, at least the way that Microsoft has defined high quality to us. And to helping to bring together those pieces and unlock some of the big barriers that different parts of the market are facing. So that's kind of how we see our role, and I think our role will evolve. We want to be really transparent about what we're doing. We really want to share our lessons learned. We're in a really fortunate and privileged position with how our program is financed, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later, but through an internal carbon tax. We're really in a really privileged position to be able to invest significant resources in this market building and the capacity building, and we want to be able to share in that with other folks who maybe aren't in a similar position and can then take our lessons learned and apply them to their own programs and understand here are the big risks that we've seen, and here's how we've tried to mitigate or overcome those risks. Here's how we think that could apply to other participants in this space. At least just more data points for everyone to have, to understand, and to learn from. So we really pride ourselves on wanting to be transparent and share what we've learned really as a market building and capacity building sense.
Yeah, thank you. So follow-up question, I would love to dig a little bit deeper into the internal model that you have, the carbon tax. So can you talk a little bit more about how that model works, especially, kind of take us through the whole process, and how do you think about divvying up or allocating the revenue from that, especially thinking of from a carbon credit perspective and then internal abatement perspective?
Sure. Yep. I feel really fortunate to be here representing an organization that has established an internal carbon tax and has done so for many years now. And the way it works at a very high level is that every business unit within Microsoft is taxed across scopes 1, 2, and a portion of scope 3 emissions, and that will get ramped up to cover all scope 3 emissions starting in 2030. And that means that, and the value we place on scope 1, 2, and 3 has evolved, and how we think about the price on carbon. But it's more than just a theoretical price on carbon. It's a real price on carbon, and each business unit then is allocating that budget, and that goes into a pool of resources that funds sustainability initiatives across the entire organization. In addition to our carbon negative goal, we also have a 100% renewable energy goal. We have a water positive goal, zero waste goal. And so this carbon tax goes to, or we call it our sustainability fee, goes to fund all of these different initiatives. And so that is essentially what funds our CDR program. Each business unit is taxed on an annual basis. So we're forecasting, here's what we think the company's emissions profile will look like across the next X amount of years. Here's what we think the budget looks like coming from each year. And then we have access to some of that budget for CDR. So I'm grateful that I'm not responsible for actually figuring out what that equation looks like, and we have really smart folks across our team and others that have adopted that valiant effort for our team. But we are fortunate that there's a significant budget and a source of resourcing that we have to deploy across a wide range of CDR pathways and projects, and not only at the project level in terms of the price per credit, but also to deploy across project due diligence and thinking about how we invest in better understanding science, technology, quantification, MRV, and then how all of that actually flows into project investment. So it's more for us than just a dollar per ton, but really thinking about it from like, how can we be most efficient with our capital and get the most good out of it as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. So shifting gears a little bit to thinking more about the standards and guidance around all of this. Henrique, from your perspective as a standard setter, and also Steph, from your perspective as a company that's trying to navigate this space, what do you see as the role of standards and guidance? What role do you think that they're playing right now? Where do you see that going in the future? So Henrique, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Those standards are essential, and we've been working together since a long time, and I hope we go much further. On last COP, GHG Protocol, SBTi, VCMI, and ICVCM standards stood up together to provide an end-to-end framework for high-integrity corporate climate action. So we are working hand in glove to deliver clear, cohesive standards for corporate climate action. And these standards provides, that's the important, the basis for reforming voluntary carbon markets based on strong and coherent integrity standards requiring the full value chain. We are talking about all parts of the value chain. And it needs to be transparently disclosed, and also the decarbonization should be in line with science. It's very good to hear Microsoft bring in here that they are looking also for their past emission. That's That's part of the intention for us to go up the bar. So when we look on delivery, what we expect to this end-to-end integrity framework to deliver. During COP28, all partners together announced that they would collaborate more closely to support companies embarking on their own climate transition journey. So each company will be on different stages on this journey, as we can see, but we need to bring them all up together on this ramp and make them further into this journey. This group continues to collaborate closely to provide more clarity to corporates on how they can engage with all those organizations and their relevant standards to achieve credible climate leadership. We have different rules, different standards, and we need guidance for them to better understand them and to better use it and to increase climate ambitions. Also, talking about the Scope 3 flexibility claim, on the discussion and development that we are having this year, that we briefly talk about, with a very high potential of delivering more climate action, will take place this year, and the participation of these standard setters on this sensible issue will be crucial to support this discussion. Thank you.
I think from my perspective, there's maybe a couple of different ways that I would answer this. From the Microsoft lens, we have set a carbon negative goal alongside many other goals within climate space that we've kind of defined for ourselves what that looks like. We've been really transparent about what that means and how we're going to get there. And so I think from that regard, setting a climate target maybe in the absence of a broader standard is something that we've gone and done, and we recognize that there was an urgency and a sense for like we need to take immediate urgent action maybe in the absence of a broader framework that was available to us in 2020 when that goal was set. But I think that generally speaking, there does need to be a consensus in the market across what good looks like, both on the supply and the demand side, and having a general framework and agreement for how that's applied so that there's, for organizations that maybe don't have the resources or capacity that Microsoft has, it's really clear how to engage within this space and achieve what the specific threshold is. That's, I think we're going to call these like the minimum bar. We want to get at least here and we want to achieve for more. So having that be defined and accepted and grounded in science is really important for general market and capacity building. And it maybe doesn't necessarily need to be a single universal truth. I think there could be a couple different pathways depending on, at least from the demand side, kind of what each corporate's goals are and resources and risk framework. But at least having some of those pathways really clearly defined, I think is important for the market building and for folks to maybe not get tripped up in let's wait for defining what perfect is and have that maybe prevent climate action in the near term. So I think it's going to have to be a little bit of a balancing act to try to put all of those pieces together.
Yeah, thank you. Thinking about balancing acts, I think Scope 3 is a particular challenge when we're thinking about emission reductions and target setting. Scope 3 emissions tend to be the largest part of a company's footprint, but they're also inherently indirect, and so they're hard to measure and hard to reduce for a company for a reporting company or company with a target. So can both of you, again, I'll start with Henrique and then move over to Steph. Can you speak to where you see the role of credits, especially when it comes to Scope 3?
Thank you, Melissa. I'll start again, I think. We have this problem. We, we have a large group of companies that are facing structural challenges which they have very low influence on. This sum up a large amount of an emissions gap that are going into the atmosphere that should not have been there if we are to follow the 1.5 degrees path, the science-aligned 1.5 degree path. So we need to do more, and the estimation is that we need to do 5-fold more. The climate finance must at least 5-fold, and the companies will have a participation in that. So if we face this challenge, first, reduce internally, facing those challenges as much as you can, as you brought. We have some challenges that are complex, some challenges that are costly, and both of them can be dealt with, even though they are complex and costly, but they must be dealt with. But also, on top of these two characteristics of the scope 3 emission reduction challenge, we have the timely challenge. So we understand that for some modifications to happen, we will need time. And that time is what we are claiming these companies to stand up, recognize those challenges, take responsibility for this gap, and invest in voluntary carbon market while getting back on track for scope 3. That's imperial for them to get back to meet their target. But they need to give incentives to them to stand up, recognize that they are not on track, recognize those challenges, and invest in internal decarbonization while also investing in voluntary carbon market. So that's the question that you brought in the beginning. We need to invest more, but first we need to act within the value chain. But so what the scope 3 flexibility claim gives to company is this possibility for them to use voluntary carbon market while getting back on track for scope 3. So scope 3 is a huge challenge, and we need to face it in different ways, including voluntary carbon market.
Scope 3 is also a big challenge for Microsoft. As I mentioned, we are planning to reduce our scope 1 and 2 to nearly 0 by 2030, but we'll likely only have our scope 3. And I don't think I would be a good steward of Microsoft if I sat up here and didn't say words like data centers and AI, which is where we're going to see big growth in our scope 3 footprint. So having the carbon removal program that we have as part of broader voluntary carbon market framework is a really important component in how we're thinking about our overall climate targets and ensuring that at the end of the day we are removing as much carbon as we are emitting, while, as I mentioned, doing some of that kind of market and capacity building at the same time. So we see this as very important to our overall climate commitments and sustainability targets, and knowing how big and sticky and challenging scope 3 is, and we have lots of really smart folks working on that internally. This is very much, our carbon removal program is very much a complement to all of that work that all of those other folks are engaged in.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So Steph, you mentioned your carbon removals program. I am curious about this point. You know, we have removals credits, we have reduction credits or avoided emissions credits. I would love to hear both of your perspectives on the role of each of those different types of credits in this net zero journey. So Steph, we'll start with you this time.
Okay. The environmentalist in me absolutely says we need both. We need every solution that we have in our toolkit, and I'm sure that that's been said many times this week, but I very deeply believe that. But I'm sitting here as a steward and representative of Microsoft, and Microsoft has chosen a specific carbon negativity goal, which requires carbon removal. And as I mentioned, we see there's this imperative to achieve global net zero by 2050 at the latest, and that will absolutely involve large-scale carbon removal, high quality, and being able to unlock part of that through our program, I think is really important. And we recognized that we were in a position where we could step up and support the building of this space. So I'd say we need both. Microsoft has chosen a specific path. That's not to say that we would advocate for every corporate to do the same. Any corporate buyer who is trying to figure out what role voluntary carbon plays within their overall climate strategy, I'd say there's just a lot of, it's a game of trade-offs, thinking about budget and emissions forecasting and risk appetite, and I think there's all sorts of factors that are going to play into whether avoidance credits, removals, both, one or the other, are part of a broader climate strategy.
Thank you, Steph. And it's very good to hear that. As you said in the beginning, as an environmentalist, you understand the importance of reduction measures, especially when we talk about nature-based solutions. So also the environmentalist in me, congrats the environmentalist in you. As Melissa said, I am a biologist. And though VCMI recognized the importance of early investment in carbon removal, as highlighted by the IPCC report, because these solutions are fundamental to achieving net zero emissions and need to be scaled up, VCMI does not require companies to purchase or retire either reduction or removal credits in order to make carbon integrity silver, gold, or platinum claims. From VCMI's perspective, companies may invest in carbon credit issued from their emission reduction or removal projects for the global transition to net zero. But why that? Because we understand that they should prioritize projects based on the quality of the climate mitigation and co-benefit impacts that they are expected to deliver. That's why it's so important for us to be together with our sister organization, ICVCM, to guarantee the end-to-end integrity for VCM. Uncertainties regarding removals should be dealt with rather than only exchanging it for removal credits. In theory, all CCP-approved credits will have their equivalency in terms of tons of CO2 regarding climate mitigation effects. That's why we don't differentiate, and we welcome the best credit that company can use to make those claims.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'd love to turn it over to our audience in just a moment for your questions, but before we do that, just one more quick question from me to both of you. If you could choose one word to describe the topic of this session, the role of the voluntary carbon market in net zero, what would that word be and why? Henrique, let's start with you.
I would choose acceleration, not only because the tagline of accelerate global net zero, but also because that's what we need right now. We have a global understanding that we need to invest, but we need to invest faster, and we need to remove and reduce the emissions among all sectors and meet all our targets. So that's what I would call acceleration of global net zero.
And I would have to say transparency. Microsoft's, we're still figuring it out. We're building our program. We are moving quick and we are learning as we go. And we want to be able to share that with folks and for other folks to share their lessons learned. And without that, we are not going to work towards achieving the common goals and targets of why we're all here in the first place. So I would say the spirit of transparency and information sharing, and I think that goes really nicely with also the concept of how we can accelerate.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to both of you. So yeah, with that, I'd love to open it up to audience Q&A. If you don't mind, just introduce yourself with your name and organization before you ask the question. I think we have somebody up here running the mic. Thank you. So yeah, just raise your hand if you've got a question for our panelists here.
Don't be shy.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Max Vernal from the Nature Conservancy. I'm interested in hearing from Microsoft and VCMI, how did Microsoft, when you're planning your strategy, you said that you still have some Scope 1 and 2 emissions left over that you're covering with credits, and for Scope 3 you said we're only going to be able to reduce this amount and the rest will be covered with credits. How did you determine that line of where you're like, I'm done with internal decarbonization, the next is going to be either too costly or is it out of your control? How did you draw that line? And for VCMI, with the Scope 3 flexibility mechanism, I don't know if you could tell us more about how did you decide that 50%? Thank you.
That's a great question. I actually can't really speak to the Scope 3 reductions piece all that well. There's lots of other folks, not in this room, but probably up in Seattle that could. And so I think it's probably a combination of understanding like what boundaries we can draw, what influence we have within our value chain, what technologies and solutions are available today, and resources and costs and what we have to deploy. So if I had to take a guess, it would probably be a bit of everything, but I can't say for certain. That falls a bit outside of my remit as a buyer on our CDR team. But happy to circle back with you and loop in the right folks who can engage more on that topic specifically.
I'll complement this part and also talk about, I think the question was about the 50% limit for the Scope 3 flexibility claim. But I'll start with how we define when it's enough. Of course, not for a specific company, but what we do have is, as Steph also brought, we have some brilliant minds that have worked not only on certain setting, but just before on IPCC 1.5 degrees pathway. And what SBTi have done was to translate those pathway into corporate common action, and that's the percentage that they define that the company must be below for their near-term target and also for their when will be their long-term target for net zero, that is the reduction of 90%. But I recognize that Microsoft is going much more than this pathway if they are to reach net zero by 2030. So different companies has different threshold, but we have a cross-sector threshold and also from different institutions that make these standards for a company to understand when this will be enough. But as we can see, those structural challenges proves to us that for different sectors, these challenges weights differently. So that's why also we have the Scope 3 flexibility claim. And about the 50% limit, we need to impose a limit for this use, and this limit needs to be tailored with companies, standard setters, and scientists, and also need to be science aligned. And this, the limit is something that we are dealing with this year for us to have the support and be a broader discussion for us to have a more science-aligned limit. I hope I answered.
Hi, I'm Brooke Swain. I'm a developer. We plug orphaned oil and gas wells and restore land bases called Rebellion Energy Solutions. So I have two questions, and I'll let you pick which one you want to answer, both of you. Okay, one is, where do you see corporate buyers winning as they assess the impacts of the communities their projects are in? Where do you see corporate buyers engaging in those communities? That could be one example. Or how do you see the value of co-benefits factoring into buyers' decisions of the projects they're investing in? Up to you guys.
Sure, I'll kick us off. We are really fortunate to be able to engage with suppliers and project developers in early stages of project development and project implementation. And Microsoft has a pretty robust due diligence process that we engage in prior to entering into any transaction with a supplier. And we're going to look at some of the kind of basic carbon fundamentals. How do you set your baseline? How are you thinking about additionality? What are your MRV plans, methods? But we take it much further than that. We want to understand, particularly for nature-based solutions, how are you embedded into your community? How are you engaging with your community? How are you taking, I heard it earlier today, a community-first approach to project implementation in a way that thinks about the livelihoods of landowners and revenue sharing and making sure that benefits are flowing back into the community. And we look at all those things and we assess them and we think about them really critically. So it's above and beyond just the carbon piece, because we, yes, like very much care about nature, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not discounting or not thinking about all of these other really important social aspects that are very much tied to the work that our suppliers and project partners are doing on the ground. So I'd like to think that it's integral in our project due diligence process. It's something that I think we have a relatively high bar for what we expect from the folks that we work with. And I think that translates into here's what we think really good actually looks like in terms of community engagement and benefit sharing and just thinking about kind of human livelihoods as a core part of project development and implementation and ongoing project management.
Thank you for your question. That's a very, very good question. And I would start in with the word that was chosen from Steph, the transparency. And transparency is crucial for us, any company, putting myself together with all the companies, for any company to engage with the communities. Of course, not all companies are so close to the project developers. That's the one that needs to be transparent and need to be together, but the companies can have this due diligence and ensure that the project developers have done what they could do to make this all in a transparent way, and also to bring local communities into their governance. Very good to hear the expression, communities first. And also bringing, maybe I'm stepping away from VCMI because this is the helm of ICVCM, and that's why we have so strong on core carbon principles, those benefits for communities, and also not only on this line, but also when we talk about transparency and when we talk about governance, we should bring local communities, and companies should be aware of it from the project developers. That's why also CCP has its label, and also if possible, they to be close to follow up this with, especially of nature-based solutions, is crucial. I think I forgot the second question, but I don't know if I answered with this whole. Sorry.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and internal strategy. This is Ana Plata from Biofix. I am curious about to know the Microsoft position about tokenization, carbon credits, or to know if this is a plan, consider that Microsoft is a technology company. So if this is a future plan to tokenizate carbon credits in order to offer these products for retail company or other companies that want to buy carbon credit in a small amount.
I'm not sure if I'm fully tracking your question, Anna. Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah, I'm curious about if you are considering the tokenization of carbon credits. I know that Microsoft is working on his decarbonization, but I'm curious about if Microsoft is considering to selling carbon credits and to tokenizate carbon credits in order to selling, not just for internal purpose, but also for being like a part of the market, like an offering of carbon credits.
Okay, I think, thank you for repeating. At this point, our targets are so large, and we are going to need millions of tons of carbon removal to achieve our goals annually, particularly 2030 and beyond, that I don't see a role in which Microsoft is ever a seller of credits. I think we're always, at this point, our view is we will always be a buyer because we have so much demand, and it's likely that our targets will continue to grow with the growth of the organization, meaning our demand and appetite for carbon credits will only continue to grow. So I don't necessarily see a world in which we're trading credits or selling. I think we'll, at least for the foreseeable future, continue to be strictly an end user in the market. Is that what you were getting at with your question? Okay.
Hi, Derek Fears, Blue Amazon. So it seems like there's been kind of an assumption in this conference that there's a lot of sort of quality issues with the supply, and if we kind of clean that up, that will just unlock a lot of demand. There's a lot of demand there, sitting on the sidelines, kind of waiting to come in. And we've seen Microsoft here a lot, which is amazing. There's not too many other buyers here, and so I'm curious, to what extent is there data that actually supports that assumption, assuming you have that? So to what extent are you guys aware of lots of other companies, either in your sort of buyer circle, either through anecdotes, through conversations you're having with CSOs, other data that's more than just a pledge, that there's actually pent-up demand waiting to come in if we can fix the quality of the supply that we've been talking about for the last few days?
That's a great question. Let me see how I can best answer that. At least from where I sit within Microsoft, I don't do a ton of other engagement with many other corporates. There's a few where I'm fortunate enough we can share notes and exchange stories, and I don't necessarily know if I have like really strong quantitative data that I could point to that kind of highlights the point that you've made. But based on kind of my previous experiences in the market, I think there's a couple of different factors at play. I think folks are concerned absolutely about the quality of supply as it translates into reputational risk. I think engaging in the voluntary carbon market shows climate ambition. I know that there's statistics out there that show corporates who purchase carbon credits are more likely to have set targets, et cetera. But I think that there's a lot of concern and fear of being caught up in, I thought what I was doing was a net good thing, and now I'm being mentioned in an article somewhere, or I've put my company, I'm a, whether you're a CSO or a program manager, or somewhere within an organization, I've put my company's reputation on the line, and that means a lot, whether you're a large or small corporate. Brand goes a long way. So I think that's a concern and is tied into quality. I also think once a company sets a climate target, I think it's hard to backtrack from that. Particularly, you make a big public statement, and companies that try to be transparent about that and show what's behind that. And if corporate targets are going to be shifting, or here's what we think good looks like from a corporate demand perspective, and then something shifts, like let's say you're a first mover in the market and you set your own target, and then you have to backtrack to maybe better realign or recalibrate with what a standards body says. I think that can be, it creates maybe a bit of whiplash for the company and for stakeholders and shareholders. So I think that also might be one potential deterrent in really engaging in the market. So those are just a couple of kind of anecdotes that from what I've seen in my time in this space.
I think this is a very good question for this panel, because in fact, we are saying here that exactly what you said, not everything is about the quality of the supply. We need also to have integrity in the demand. So that's why the reason of VCMI on the demand side. For us to increase the participation of companies on voluntary carbon market, we do not only need quality of supply, we need confidence from them in how they will buy it and how they will claim why they are buying and the amount they are buying. And that's what the claim clause of PRETEC is. So it's a claim code, what they can claim and how they can claim, and why, what are the conditions for them to use those carbon credits to make claims. And that is part of the end-to-end integrity, and that is how we think the market will understand VCMs as a valid solution for the climate crisis. So it's not only quality of supply, it's also integrity on demand side.
Can I squeeze in a question? Hi, this is Saskia Feast. I'm with Climate Impact Partners. We are an environmental instrument retailer. We've been in the market since 1997, and my question or comment is for you, Henrique. For the last 5 years, we've done a survey of the Global Fortune 500, which is publicly available on our website, looking at what their climate commitments are and what the results of that action is. And last year's analysis said, okay, the things that are most important for a corporate to take action are measure, set a 2030 goal, so thank you Microsoft for setting a 2030 goal, and having a CSO, of which 48% now have a Chief Sustainability Officer. So those are the things that are really helpful. And we all know, I mean, I believe in markets at scale. We're a for-profit entity doing this but it's to put a price on carbon to help drive the operational reductions. I thought it might be interesting for people to know that, for the companies that have a 2030 target or sooner of net zero or negative emissions, their operational emissions have gone down 7%. So they're actually driving internal reductions too. Whereas those that have later targets, their emissions have gone up. And so you talked about one of your hopes being accelerating action. Unfortunately, what we saw last year was that the new commitments were all 2040 or later. They were not 2030 and new. So I'm hoping that when the clarity of VCMI and ICVCM comes out, we will see in this year's 6th analysis lots of 2030 goals and maybe people bringing their goals forward. But anyway, Henrique, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I just want to thank you for this comment. It's a very good data for us to understand what makes company do more, not only internally, but also beyond their value chain. And of course, as we said in the beginning, we prioritize first internal decarbonization, and it's great for us to incentivize more companies have their targets for 2030. The only limit that we have now is before 2050, and that's maybe not enough because not all companies in the world have those targets. If all companies had those targets by 2040 or 50, it will happen, but sometimes those leaders, those climate leaders, need to act also on behalf of those that cannot act by their own. So thank you for the comments.
Thank you very much. And with that, we're out of time, but just want to say a big thank you to our panelists today. Thanks again to the Climate Action Reserve, and thanks everybody for joining us.